Have you ever stared at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, listening to the gentle hum of your climate-controlled, ridiculously overpriced apartment, while your chest tightens with a panic so profound you can barely breathe? You close your eyes, but all you see are the minimum payment notifications, the invisible chains binding you to a life that looks like a masterpiece to the outside world, yet feels like a suffocating tomb on the inside. Be brutally honest with yourself right now. Did you sign away 7 years of your future labor for that gleaming luxury SUV because it truly brings joy to your soul, or because you were utterly paralyzed by the thought of pulling up to the valet in a perfectly fine decade-old sedan? If the raw sting of that question makes you want to look away, do not move. You are exactly who needs to hear this. You are standing on the precipice of a terrifying awakening, and I am the ghost reaching out from the very future you are blindly running toward. MyWiseWallet warmly welcomes you to a conversation that the financial industry is desperately praying you never hear. Before we tear down the velvet curtains of this grand illusion, I ask that you hit the subscribe button to support the channel, giving us the strength to continue exposing the truths that can set you entirely free. For more years than I care to admit, I was the undisputed king of a beautifully curated lie. The banking industry had a clinical term for my existence: a Henry. A high earner, not rich yet. But let me tell you what that acronym actually feels like when the cameras are off. It feels like drowning in an ocean of artisan coffee and tailored wool. I had the corner office with the panoramic view, the Italian leather shoes that cost more than my first car, and a lifestyle that commanded absolute envy on every social media feed. Every morning, I drove into a corporate parking lot that resembled a graveyard of depreciating German engineering, every single hood ornament financed by a silent, creeping desperation. Inside the break room, we traded stories about exclusive resort destinations and limited edition designer releases, nodding with artificial smiles, entirely oblivious to the fact that we were all participating in a high-stakes masquerade ball. We were trading our actual irreplaceable life force for the fleeting, hollow place of strangers we did not even genuinely like. The brutal, unvarnished truth that nobody dares to whisper in those echoing corporate hallways is that the overwhelming majority of the glamour blinding you every single day is nothing more than a meticulously stage-managed theatrical production. And its star performers are completely, utterly, and devastatingly exhausted. Behind the hand-stitched leather steering wheels are human beings having silent panic attacks at red lights. Beneath the imported fabrics are chests hollowed out by the sheer anxiety of surviving paycheck to paycheck on a 6-figure salary. We were entirely plugged into a psychological matrix, manipulated by advertising algorithms that ruthlessly weaponized our ancient, biological need for tribal belonging against our bank accounts. They convinced our primal brains that without the luxury watch or the aesthetic vacation photos, we would be cast out into the wilderness to perish. We tragically confused the rushing river of a high income with the deep, life-sustaining reservoir of actual wealth. I watched executives, pulling in $500,000 a year, walk around with negative net worths, quietly asking to borrow $200 just days before payday. They were high-income earners living in gilded cages, tragically confusing the reckless ability to spend money with the quiet, unshakable power of actually keeping it. Witnessing that tragic confusion in others was sobering, but it was nothing compared to the violent collision with reality I experienced when the mirror was finally turned on myself. It happened on a random Tuesday in November, under the harsh, fluorescent glow of my kitchen pendant lights, fixtures that I had spent 3 weeks of my life working just to pay for. I was staring at a sprawling spreadsheet I had desperately avoided creating for years. The numbers did not lie, and they offered zero comfort. Despite pulling in a salary that mathematically placed me in the top tier of earners nationwide, my true net worth was a devastating joke. Between the astronomical lease on the European car sitting in my assigned spot, the mortgage on a zip code purchased purely for the prestige, and the endless stream of premium subscriptions required to maintain the facade, I was running on a treadmill set to a lethal speed. I remember feeling a cold, suffocating terror creeping up my throat as the math finally clicked into place in my brain. If I lost my job tomorrow, this entire curated masterpiece of a life would collapse into foreclosure and repossession in exactly 42 days. 42 days. That was the entirety of my safety net. All the stress, the 80-hour weeks, the missed family dinners, the relentless anxiety, it had bought me barely a month of survival. I realized that every dollar I earned was already spoken for by a past version of myself who desperately wanted to impress people I did not even care about. The crushing weight of those obligations meant my future was entirely owned by banks and lenders. I was a tenant in my own life. I collapsed into the expensive leather of my dining chair and wept. It was not a gentle crying. It was the ugly, hiving sob of a person mourning the death of their own ego. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my success for what it truly was: a highly customized, self-inflicted prison sentence. In that shattered, vulnerable moment, the paralyzing fear of looking poor was completely obliterated by the absolute terror of actually being poor. I decided right then, with tears staining a mahogany table I could barely afford, that I would rather be wealthy in the shadows than secretly broke in the spotlight. Stepping away from that precipice required more than just cutting up credit cards. It demanded a violent, agonizing rewiring of my entire psychological framework. You cannot spend decades attaching your deepest sense of self-worth to the logos on your clothing and the horsepower of your engine, only to drop them overnight without experiencing severe emotional withdrawals. The first few months of my financial awakening were profoundly isolating. When I started declining the $300 steakhouse dinners and bowing out of the annual luxury ski trips, the reactions from my inner circle were not supportive. They were deeply suspicious. In a culture completely intoxicated by conspicuous consumption, choosing to step off the treadmill is viewed as a direct threat, a silent indictment of everyone else's choices. People whispered that my career must be in trouble, that I had lost my edge, or that I was experiencing some sort of midlife crisis. And the brutal truth is, those whispers hurt. My ego screamed at me to go back, to buy something shiny just to prove I still belonged to the tribe. But as the weeks turned into months, a strange and beautiful transformation began to occur in my mind. I started looking at the relentless marketing campaigns bombarding my screens not as invitations to happiness, but as hostile attempts to steal my freedom. I began to deconstruct the manufactured desires that had ruled my life. I realized that a luxury watch does not tell time any better than a cheap one. It only tells other people how much money you are willing to waste for their approval. Deprogramming myself meant learning to sit alone in a quiet room and finally feeling like I was enough, completely stripped of my expensive armor. I found myself walking through high-end shopping districts, feeling entirely immune to the spell. The glittering storefronts no longer looked like temples of success. They looked like traps designed for the incredibly insecure. I was finally reclaiming sovereignty over my own desires, learning the profound difference between what I actually wanted and what the world had conditioned me to want. I was no longer trading my precious, finite hours on earth to subsidize the profit margins of luxury conglomerates. The craving for external validation slowly withered, replaced by an intoxicating, rock-solid internal conviction. Once those psychological chains were severed, the actual mechanics of dismantling my fake life and building a real one felt less like a sacrifice and more like a rescue mission. The first casualty of my new philosophy was the German SUV. Handing those keys back to the dealership was a physical untethering. I practically floated out of the showroom. I replaced it with a used, utterly unremarkable Japanese sedan that I bought entirely in cash. Then came the apartment. I packed up my carefully curated designer life and moved to a smaller space in a neighborhood that nobody at my firm had ever heard of. I ruthlessly liquidated the physical manifestations of my ego. The watches, the designer luggage, the absurdly expensive golf clubs I barely used. And then the magic began. For the first time in my life, my checking account was not a temporary holding cell for money on its way to creditors. A massive gap opened up between my high income and my newly lowered expenses, creating a rushing river of surplus capital. I began quietly, aggressively funneling that money into index funds, real estate, and income-producing assets. I became a practitioner of stealth wealth. To the outside world, I looked like a guy who had plateaued, someone who had simply settled for mediocrity. But on paper, behind the encryption of my brokerage accounts, I was building an empire. Every share of stock I purchased felt like buying back a tiny piece of my future. I was not just saving money. I was hoarding freedom. It turns out that true wealth is incredibly quiet. It does not demand attention, it does not require a filter, and it certainly does not care what the valet thinks. True wealth is the invisible force field that protects your family from the harsh unpredictability of the world. It is the peace of mind knowing that if the economy crashes or the industry shifts, you will not just survive, you will sleep soundly. The mechanics were shockingly boring. Automate, invest, hold, repeat. But the psychological leverage those mechanics provided was exhilarating. I was trading the heavy, exhausting illusion of being rich for the light, mathematical reality of actually becoming wealthy. The relentless execution of those quiet, unglamorous financial mechanics eventually yielded a reward so profound that no amount of luxury could ever replicate it. Today, I wake up in a modest bed, drive my perfectly average car, and wear clothes without a single recognizable logo, Yet I walk through the world with a towering sense of invincibility. I am no longer a high earner drowning in debt. I have crossed the chasm into actual financial independence. And the view from this side is breathtakingly peaceful. The panic attacks are gone. The suffocating tightness in my chest has been replaced by deep, measured breaths. I still work, but I work because I choose to. Not because I am a hostage to a lifestyle I cannot afford to maintain. If a project offends my values or a client crosses a boundary, I have the absolute unadulterated power to simply say no. That two-letter word is the ultimate luxury, and it is a luxury that no boutique on earth can sell you. The matrix we live in is designed to drain you, to keep you running on that treadmill until you are too old and too tired to enjoy the fruits of your own labor. But you have the power to unplug. You can choose to step out of the masquerade ball today. It will be terrifying, it will be lonely at first, and it will require a level of brutal honesty that most people are entirely incapable of facing. I am sharing this deeply personal excavation with you not to preach, but to extend a lifeline. Look closely at the gilded cage you are building for yourself. Question every single purchase that stems from a desire to project status. Are you buying it to enhance your life, or are you buying it to mask your insecurities? You have a finite amount of time, energy, and earning power in this life. Do not sacrifice it on the altar of consumerism. Break the chains. Liquidate the ego. Embrace the profound, beautiful anonymity of living below your means. The world will try to convince you that success looks like a driveway full of imported steel and a closet full of Italian silk. Let them believe it. While they are busy financing their illusions, you will be busy financing your freedom, and when you finally taste it, you will never look back. The journey from an exhausting, debt-financed illusion of wealth to true financial independence is a profound psychological and practical transformation. Modern society heavily conditions us to equate success with conspicuous consumption. Luxurious cars, prestige zip codes, and designer labels. Creating a relentless treadmill where high income only serves to service high debt. The turning point comes when we confront the terrifying mathematical reality that our carefully curated lives are built on fragile foundations, often just weeks away from total financial ruin. Breaking free from this matrix requires an agonizing ego death and the courage to endure social judgment as we step away from a toxic culture of spending by ruthlessly cutting expenses, liquidating status symbols, and embracing stealth wealth. The money previously wasted on external validation becomes a powerful tool to buy back our future. True wealth is not loud or flashy. It is the quiet, invisible accumulation of assets that provides the ultimate luxury, absolute freedom. It is the power to say no, the ability to sleep soundly during economic storms, and the sovereignty to own your time completely. Ultimately, trading the heavy burden of looking rich for the mathematical reality of actually being wealthy offers a breathtakingly peaceful existence that no luxury good could ever replicate. True wealth is completely invisible. It is measured in time, peace of mind, and options, not in status symbols or material possessions. When we spend money to impress people we don't genuinely care about, we are voluntarily trading our finite, precious life energy to build a self-inflicted prison. True financial freedom begins the moment you decide that your internal peace is more valuable than external validation. Confront your numbers. Sit down and calculate your exact runway. How many days you could survive if your income stopped tomorrow? Let the mathematical reality dictate your actions, not your emotions. Audit your motivations. Review your recurring expenses and recent purchases. Brutally ask yourself, am I paying for this to genuinely enhance my life or to project status and mask insecurity? Liquidate the ego. Identify expensive habits, subscriptions, or physical items that only serve your ego. Cut them out or sell them and immediately redirect those funds into debt payoff or index funds. Embrace stealth wealth. Stop caring about looking successful to your peers. Purposely lower your outward standard of living to widen the gap between your income and expenses, using that surplus to silently finance your future. What is one expense or status symbol you have cut out of your life recently that actually made you happier or less stressed? Please share your thoughts in the comments below so we can all learn and draw inspiration from each other's perspectives. Also, if you found value in this message, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. It gives us the motivation to keep creating more impactful content for you.